They mocked the widow left without a partner, until the Duke whispered, "May I have this waltz?" The chandeliers of Thornfield Hall cast their golden light upon the grandest ball of the season, illuminating the silk and satin of London's elite as they twirled across the polished floor. Yet in the corner, half hidden behind a marble column, Lady Seraphine Lorne stood alone, a portrait of quiet dignity in her silver-grey gown, neither pure mourning nor celebration, but the uncertain shade between grief and hope. 2 years a widow, she had finally accepted Lady Harwick's invitation, believing the time for seclusion had passed. How naive she had been to think society would welcome her return. The whispers began the moment she entered, growing bolder with each passing hour. "Too eager to shed her widow's weeds," Lady Ottilie Greythorne murmured behind her ivory fan, loud enough for Seraphine to hear. One might question if she ever truly mourned Captain Lorne at all. A ripple of delicate laughter followed, cutting through the music like glass. Seraphine gripped her copper-threaded fan tighter, the last gift from her husband before the sea claimed him. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her retreat. "To observe how she stands there, as though expecting an invitation to dance," another voice added. "Who would dare partner a woman whose husband vanished without a proper burial? It invites misfortune." The dance card hanging from her wrist remained pristine, unmarked by a single name. Each empty line was a public declaration of her isolation. Seraphine touched the high collar of her gown, a gesture of self-comfort she had developed in the long months of solitude. "Perhaps she believes a duke might rescue her from obscurity," Lady Ottilie continued, casting a meaningful glance toward the entrance where several titled gentlemen conversed. "Though I dare say even a second son of a baron would balk at claiming a widow with neither fortune nor family connections to recommend her." The orchestra paused between selections, and in that brief silence, Lady Ottilie's words carried across the ballroom. Several heads turned toward Seraphine, their expressions a mixture of pity and silent agreement. The copper threads in her fan caught the light as her fingers trembled. "I wonder," Lady Ottilie said, raising her voice slightly, "if she understands that a proper widow should know when she remains unwelcome in certain circles." The music resumed, a waltz of all things, and couples formed on the floor. Seraphine watched as gentlemen led their partners forward, the ladies' skirts billowing like clouds as they began to turn. The beauty of it pierced her heart, for it had been in just such a waltz that Captain Lorne had first held her hand, his eyes promising a lifetime of such dances, a lifetime that had lasted merely 3 years. The musicians played on, oblivious to her pain. Seraphine considered retreat, but where? The terrace would expose her to the biting January air, the refreshment room would force more unwanted conversation, and an early departure would confirm her defeat. She was trapped by propriety as surely as a butterfly pinned to velvet. Then the murmuring changed. A current of whispers swept through the ballroom, different from the malicious gossip of before. Heads turned toward the entrance, and even Lady Ottilie fell silent, her fan stilling mid-flutter. "The Duke of Ravensdale," announced the footman, his voice carrying over the hushed crowd. The music faltered as Duke Alaric Dragor entered the ballroom. Tall and commanding, he moved with the confidence of a man who needed no introduction. His austere black evening clothes contrasted sharply with the colourful plumage of the other gentleman, the only adornment a silver pin in his cravat. A thin scar traced a line above his upper lip, rumoured to be from a duel fought in defence of his sister's honour years ago. Society had not seen him in London for nearly half a decade. His presence at Lady Harwick's ball was unexpected, a shock that momentarily eclipsed even the cruel sport of mocking a defenceless widow. "His Grace does not dance," Lady Ottilie informed her circle, recovering quickly. "Not since his return from the continent. They say he has sworn off all frivolous pleasures." Seraphine cared little for such gossip. The Duke's arrival had granted her a reprieve, however brief, from being the object of scrutiny. She used the moment to compose herself, straightening her shoulders and smoothing her skirts. Perhaps soon she might slip away, her absence unnoticed amid the excitement of a ducal appearance. The waltz continued, though many dancers faltered as they strained to observe the Duke's progress through the room. He acknowledged acquaintances with curt nods, his expression severe and unyielding. The crowd parted before him, eager yet hesitant, like waves retreating from an approaching storm. And then, inexplicably, his steely gaze found Seraphine. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. Surely such a man had no reason to notice her, but his eyes remained fixed upon her face, unwavering and intent. The directness of his regard made her pulse quicken. No one had truly seen her since her husband's death. She had become invisible, a ghost in grey silk. The Duke changed direction, moving purposefully across the ballroom toward her corner. Whispers erupted in his wake. Seraphine fought the urge to flee. What could he possibly want with her? He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the deep blue undertones in his dark eyes. His gaze was not cruel like the others, but neither was it kind. It was searching, as though he sought to read some truth written in her features. Then, to the astonishment of everyone within sight, Duke Alaric Dragor bowed, a perfect, formal gesture of respect. "Lady Lorne," he said, his voice low and controlled. The music seemed to fade around them as he leaned slightly forward and spoke the words that would change everything. "May I have this waltz?" The ballroom fell silent, save for the strains of the orchestra, which seemed to play from some distant realm. Seraphine stood motionless, certain she had misheard. The Duke of Ravensdale, the man who, according to whispers, had not danced since his return to England, was requesting her hand for a waltz. "Your Grace," she managed at last, her voice barely audible, "you honor me beyond measure, but I fear you may not understand the circumstances of my position in this assembly." His expression remained unchanged. "I understand perfectly, Lady Lorne. I am asking for a dance, not an explanation." From the corner of her eye, Seraphine could see Lady Otterley's scandalized face, her mouth forming a perfect circle of disbelief. Other guests had stopped their conversations to stare openly at this impossible scene unfolding before them. "People will talk, Your Grace," Seraphine warned, though her heart raced with something dangerously close to hope. "Let them," he replied with quiet authority. "I have found that those who speak most freely often have the least worth hearing." He extended his gloved hand, palm upward, a question, a challenge, an offer of dignity that she had not expected to find in this glittering prison of propriety. For a moment, Seraphine hesitated, her copper-threaded fan trembling between her fingers. Then, with a courage born of 2 years of silent suffering, she set the fan upon the nearby chairback and placed her hand in his. "Yes," she said simply, "I should like to dance." He led her onto the floor as the other dancers instinctively moved aside, creating a circle of observation around them. The musicians, sensing the peculiar tension, played with renewed vigor, as though the waltz itself recognized the importance of this moment. "I must warn you, Your Grace," Seraphine said as he took his position, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "It has been some time since I have danced. I may be somewhat unpracticed." "Then we shall reacquaint you with the steps," he answered, his voice betraying the barest hint of warmth. "The music remembers, even when we believe we have forgotten." With that, he guided her into the waltz. His lead was impeccable, confident yet responsive, making it seem as though they had danced together countless times before. Seraphine felt her body remembering, turning and stepping in perfect time, her skirts swirling around them like silver mist. "They are watching us," she observed, noticing how the crowd's attention remained fixed upon their every movement. "Indeed they are," the Duke replied, "and tomorrow they shall speak of nothing else. Let us give them something worthy of their conversation." As they turned, Seraphine caught sight of Lady Otterley's sour expression, transforming into a brittle smile as she leaned toward her companions, no doubt already crafting new barbs for distribution. "Lady Greythorne appears distressed by our partnership," Seraphine noted, surprised by her own boldness. The Duke executed a flawless turn before responding. "Lady Greythorne's distress is of no consequence to me. I select my dance partners based on criteria beyond her limited understanding." "And what criteria might those be, Your Grace?" Seraphine ventured, curiosity overcoming caution. His eyes met hers with unexpected directness. "Character, Lady Lorne, the quality that society most readily praises yet least truly values." They continued in silence for several measures, the music weaving around them like an enchantment. Seraphine became aware of a strange sensation in her chest, a lightness she had not experienced since before the news of her husband's ship had reached her. It was not happiness exactly, but perhaps its distant relation, the absence of active sorrow. "May I inquire as to why you singled me out, Your Grace?" she asked finally. "Surely there were many ladies who would have welcomed your attention." "Precisely," he said with a hint of irony. "Too many, and none standing alone with such composure amid undeserved scorn." The waltz carried them near Lady Harwick, their hostess, whose expression vacillated between social alarm and aristocratic calculation. As they turned away, the Duke continued, "I too know what it is to be the subject of speculation and judgment, Lady Lorne. Because of your absence from London? Because of my return, he corrected. Society forgets nothing and forgives less. Yet it lacks the courage to voice its accusations directly. They were nearing the end of the waltz. Seraphine felt a curious reluctance to have the dance conclude, knowing that once the music ceased, reality would reassert itself, and reality had been unkind these past 2 years. "What shall I do when the music ends, Your Grace?" she asked, the question escaping before she could reconsider its impropriety. Something changed in his stern countenance, not a smile, but perhaps an acknowledgement of their shared understanding of social battlefields. "When the music ends, Lady Lorne, you will curtsy. I shall bow, and together we shall demonstrate that dignity requires no validation from those who lack it themselves." The final notes of the waltz sounded, and true to his word, they completed the customary gestures with perfect form. The Duke offered his arm, which she accepted, and he escorted her from the dance floor with measured steps. As they passed Lady Ottilie's circle, he paused, addressing the group with cold precision. "Ladies, I trust you have enjoyed the spectacle. Allow me to introduce you properly to Lady Seraphine Lorne, widow of Captain James Lorne of the Royal Navy, who gave his life in service to the Crown during the Typhoon of '48. A man of valor, married to a woman of equal courage." Lady Ottilie's face flushed crimson. "Your Grace, we are all acquainted with Lady Lorne's circumstances." "Evidently not," he replied, his tone making the temperature of the room seem to drop several degrees. "For if you were truly acquainted with Lady Lorne's character, you would address her with the respect her fortitude commands." Without waiting for a response, he turned to Seraphine. "I believe some refreshment might be welcome after our dance. Would you permit me to escort you to the terrace? I find the air inside grows somewhat stifling." Seraphine met Lady Ottilie's stunned gaze with calm dignity. "Indeed, Your Grace. I should appreciate both the refreshment and the company." As he led her away, the buzz of conversation resumed behind them, louder and more frantic than before. Seraphine realized that by morning her name would feature in drawing rooms across London, not as an object of pity, but as the mysterious widow who had drawn the Duke of Ravensdale back into society's dance. The terrace opened before them like a sanctuary, its stone balustrades gleaming silver in the winter moonlight. A few gas lamps cast pools of warm illumination, but the guests who might have sought the night air had retreated indoors to witness the aftermath of the Duke's unprecedented waltz. For the moment, Seraphine and the Duke were quite alone beneath the star-scattered sky. A chill breeze stirred the air and Seraphine suppressed a shiver. Without comment, the Duke removed his evening coat and placed it around her shoulders, a gesture that would raise eyebrows even higher were it observed. "Your Grace, I cannot," she began. "You can and you shall," he interrupted firmly. "Pneumonia would be a poor reward for your courage this evening." The weight of the fine wool enveloped her, still warm from his body, and carrying the faint scent of cedar and something less definable, perhaps the essence of authority itself. The coat was far too large, making her appear even more delicate within its folds, yet she found herself drawing it closer rather than protesting further. "Thank you," she said simply, both for the coat and for what had transpired on the dance floor. "Though I fear your kindness may cost you considerable social capital." He made a dismissive sound, more exhalation than laugh. "Social capital, as you term it, holds value only to those who need society's approval. I assure you I do not." They walked to the balustrade, where London spread before them in a tapestry of lamplit streets and shadowed squares. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unasked questions. "You must think me terribly forward," Seraphine said at last, "accepting a dance when convention dictates I should still be in half-mourning." The Duke considered this, his profile sharp against the night sky. "I think you a woman who has honored her husband's memory more truly than any prescribed period of wearing black could signify. Tell me, Lady Lorne, would your husband have wished you to stand alone in corners while life continued around you?" The question pierced her with its accuracy. James had been vibrant, full of laughter and life. "No," she answered honestly, "he would have hated it. He once told me that if fate should ever separate us, he would expect me to dance at every opportunity, for both of us." "A wise man," the Duke observed, "and yet, until tonight, you have not followed his counsel." Seraphine traced a finger along the cold stone railing. "It was not for lack of desire to honor his wishes, but one cannot dance without a partner, Your Grace, and none have been forthcoming. Because of whispers about ill fortune? Because of your lack of dowry or powerful family connections? Society's values are gravely disordered. Yet you yourself have avoided society's dances until tonight," she noted. "Might I ask what changed?" The Duke's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. Perhaps I recognized a kindred spirit, someone else who understands that the most difficult battles are often fought in ballrooms rather than battlefields. From within the house, the music changed, another waltz beginning. As if the orchestra sought to recapture the magic of what had just transpired, the notes drifted through the terrace doors, a reminder of the world they had momentarily escaped. "Will you return to the ball, Your Grace?" Seraphine asked, suddenly aware that she might be detaining him from more important social obligations. "Eventually," he replied, "when I am certain you no longer require a shield against wagging tongues." His directness startled her. "Is that what you believe you are? A shield?" The Duke turned to face her fully, his expression grave in the lamplight. "For tonight, perhaps. But shields merely deflect. They do not eliminate the threat. What you truly require, Lady Lorne, is restoration to your rightful place in society, not as an object of pity or scorn, but as a woman of substance and character. And how might that be accomplished?" she asked, attempting to keep her tone light despite the sudden intensity of his gaze. "Through consistent, visible patronage from someone whose position cannot be questioned," he stated matter-of-factly. "Someone like myself." Seraphine drew back slightly, caution overcoming gratitude. "Your Grace, while I appreciate your gallantry this evening, I cannot accept ongoing charity. I have managed these 2 years without a protector." "Managed," he repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. "Is that what you wish for your future? To merely manage?" Before she could formulate a response, the terrace doors opened. Lady Harwick emerged, her expression a studied mixture of concern and propriety. "Your Grace, Lady Lorne," she greeted them with a forced smile. "I was beginning to worry. The night air is quite severe." The Duke inclined his head slightly. "Your concern does you credit, Lady Harwick. We were just discussing the remarkable view of London from your terrace." "Indeed," Lady Harwick replied, clearly not believing this for a moment. "Nevertheless, I must insist you both return inside. Lady Otterley has organized a card party, and your presence would be most welcome, Your Grace." The unspoken implication was clear. The Duke's presence was welcome, while Seraphine's was merely tolerated. The brief interlude of equality on the terrace was ending. Seraphine began to remove his coat, preparing to return to her role as the invisible widow, but the Duke's hand on her arm stayed the motion. "A moment, Lady Harwick," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Before we rejoin your excellent gathering, I have a matter to discuss with Lady Lorne." Their hostess hesitated, clearly torn between curiosity and the impropriety of leaving them unchaperoned. The Duke solved her dilemma neatly. "Pray, give us 2 minutes. You may observe from the doorway if propriety demands it." Recognizing defeat, Lady Harwick retreated to the threshold, remaining in sight but, thankfully, out of earshot. The Duke turned back to Seraphine, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Lady Lorne, I shall speak plainly. I require your assistance in a matter of some delicacy." "My assistance?" Seraphine echoed, bewildered. "What possible help could I offer to the Duke of Ravensdale?" "I have returned to London with a purpose. My younger sister, Lady Alara, will make her debut this season after years in the country. She will need guidance from a woman of impeccable character and resilience, qualities you possess in abundance." Seraphine blinked in surprise. "But surely Lady Alara has relatives or your own connections." "Lady Alara has no mother, and our female relations are either too elderly or too concerned with their own daughter's prospects to give her the attention she deserves." His voice remained steady, but Seraphine detected a note of genuine concern. "I would consider it a personal favor if you would agree to assist in her introduction to society." Understanding dawned slowly. This was not charity, it was an exchange. By appointing her as his sister's companion, he would elevate Seraphine's social standing, while simultaneously providing Lady Alara with a chaperone who understood both the glories and dangers of the season. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "your offer is most unexpected. May I inquire as to why you would entrust such a responsibility to someone you have just met?" For the first time, something like a true smile touched his stern features, transforming his face with a warmth that startled her. "Who better than someone who has survived society's cruelty with her dignity intact? Besides, Lady Lorne, we have not just met." At her puzzled expression, he continued, "Your husband served aboard the HMS Intrepid under my cousin's command before his final voyage. Captain Lorne was highly regarded, a man of honor and intelligence. When I observed his widow standing alone tonight, I recognized an opportunity to repay an old debt while securing excellent guidance for my sister." The music from within grew louder as the doors opened wider. Lady Harwick was clearly signalling that their time was concluded. "I shall call upon you tomorrow at 2, the Duke said, his voice lowered. "We can discuss the particulars then, if you are amenable." Seraphine found herself nodding, still processing this sudden turn in her fortunes. "Yes, Your Grace. I shall receive you at 2. He offered his arm, and she placed her hand upon it, acutely aware of Lady Harwick's scrutiny as they re-entered the ballroom. The Duke's coat remained draped around her shoulders, a silent declaration of his protection that no one could misinterpret. As they stepped back into the light and music, whispers erupted anew, but they seemed to pass around Seraphine like water around stone. For the first time in 2 years, she walked among the ton not as a pitiful shadow, but as the woman specifically chosen by the Duke of Ravensdale, for reasons that would set tongues wagging from Mayfair to Chelsea by morning's light. And for the first time since James had been lost to the sea, Seraphine felt the faintest stirring of something she had thought forever extinguished, anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. The morning brought weak winter sunlight and a flurry of calling cards to Seraphine's modest townhouse in Bloomsbury. News of the Duke's unprecedented attention had spread through London with remarkable efficiency, transforming the formerly shunned widow into an object of intense curiosity overnight. Mrs. Winters, Seraphine's housekeeper and sole remaining servant from better days, arranged the cards in a neat fan upon the silver tray, her weathered face alight with satisfaction. 3 countesses, a viscountess, and Lady Darlington herself, she announced, placing the tray on the small table in the morning room. "All before noon. It seems you've become fashionable, my lady." Seraphine set aside her correspondence, a letter half completed to her cousin in Bath, and examined the cards with bemusement. "Not fashionable, Mrs. Winters, merely interesting. There's a significant difference. Begging your pardon, my lady, but after 2 years of empty hallways, I'll gladly welcome either." The housekeeper adjusted the coal in the small grate, coaxing the modest fire to greater warmth. "Shall I prepare the drawing room for callers?" Seraphine considered the implications. To receive these sudden well-wishers would acknowledge their previous neglect, while tacitly accepting their renewed interest based solely on the Duke's momentary attention. "No," she decided firmly. "I am not at home to anyone today, save one caller at 2 o'clock. Mrs. Winters' eyebrows rose significantly. "His Grace, I presume?" "Indeed. We have business matters to discuss." Seraphine kept her tone neutral, though the very thought of the impending visit sent a flutter of nervous energy through her chest. "Please ensure we have fresh tea and perhaps those almond biscuits, if cook can manage it." "Very good, my lady." Mrs. Winters hesitated at the door. "And shall I lay out the blue silk gown? The one with the silver piping?" Seraphine looked up sharply. "That would hardly be appropriate for a business discussion, Mrs. Winters." The housekeeper's expression remained carefully bland. "Of course, my lady. The grey day dress, then, with perhaps the pearl earrings that were your mother's." Before Seraphine could protest this sartorial suggestion, a knock at the front door echoed through the house. Mrs. Winters departed to answer it, returning moments later with a large box tied with silver ribbon. "Delivered by the Duke's footman just now," she explained, setting the box on the table with a knowing glance. Seraphine untied the ribbon with cautious fingers. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay her copper-threaded fan, the one she had abandoned on the chairback before accepting the Duke's invitation to dance. Accompanying it was a note written in a bold, decisive hand. "Lady Lorne, you departed Lady Harwick's gathering without this treasured possession. I took the liberty of retrieving it, knowing its sentimental value to you. Until this afternoon, Ravensdale." She traced her finger over the fan's delicate ribs, moved by the unexpected thoughtfulness of its return. The Duke had noticed not only her isolation, but also the significance of this particular item. It was a level of observation that spoke of genuine attention rather than mere social calculation. As the mantel clock chimed noon, Seraphine found herself drawn to the window, watching the street below with unfamiliar anticipation. 2 hours until the Duke's arrival. 2 hours to prepare herself for whatever proposition lay in his offer regarding Lady Alara, and to determine whether she could or should accept. The grey day dress, she decided, but perhaps with the pearl earrings after all. Precisely at 2 o'clock, the Duke's carriage, unmarked but unmistakably fine, drew up before the townhouse. Seraphine observed from behind the drawing-room curtain as he descended, noting the absence of a footman or driver. He had come alone. In a closed carriage he had driven himself, an oddity that would surely add another layer to the gossip already circulating. When Mrs. Winters announced him moments later, Seraphine was seated in the most dignified of her chairs, her copper fan resting on the side table, as though casually placed there rather than deliberately positioned to acknowledge its return. "Your Grace," she greeted him, rising as he entered. "You are most punctual." The Duke appeared even more imposing in the modest confines of her drawing room than he had in Lady Harwick's ballroom. Daylight revealed the precise tailoring of his clothes, the subtle quality of fabrics that spoke of wealth without ostentation. The scar above his lip was more noticeable, a silver line that somehow enhanced, rather than diminished, his commanding appearance. "Lady Lorne," he bowed, then approached as she gestured to the chair opposite hers. "I trust you received your fan." "I did, with gratitude. It was most thoughtful of you to notice it had been left behind." A brief silence followed as Mrs. Winters brought tea, her expression betraying poorly concealed curiosity, before she reluctantly withdrew, closing the door with pointed significance. "Your housekeeper disapproves of our unchaperoned meeting," the Duke observed, accepting the cup Seraphine offered. "Mrs. Winters is concerned for proprieties, as any good servant should be," Seraphine replied. "Though I assured her our discussion concerns your sister, she remains suspicious that more irregular matters might be at hand." The faintest trace of amusement crossed his features, and she would be correct to harbor such suspicions, though perhaps not in the manner she imagines. Seraphine set down her cup, suddenly alert. "I do not take your meaning, Your Grace." "Then allow me to clarify." He leaned forward slightly, his manner shifting from social to purposeful. "The matter of my sister is entirely genuine. Lady Alara requires a chaperone of impeccable character for her debut season. However, there is an additional consideration that I did not disclose last evening." "And what might that be?" Seraphine asked, wariness creeping into her voice. The Duke's gaze was direct, unflinching. "I require a wife, Lady Lorne." The teacup in Seraphine's hand trembled before she could steady it. Of all possible declarations, this was the least expected. "Your Grace, if this is some misguided attempt at—" "It is a statement of fact," he interrupted calmly. "I have extensive estates that need an heir. I have a sister who requires a proper feminine influence, and I have neither the time nor inclination for the usual rituals of courtship among debutantes who seek a title rather than a man." Seraphine stared at him, momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it was remarkably steady. "And you believe I might suit these requirements?" "I know you would." His certainty was absolute. "You are intelligent, composed, and resilient. You understand loss and duty. You conducted yourself with dignity even when society abandoned you. These qualities recommend you far more than beauty or fortune, though you possess the former in abundance." The compliment, delivered as matter-of-factly as if he were commenting on the weather, brought unexpected warmth to Seraphine's cheeks. "Your Grace, while I am flattered by your assessment, I must point out that we are virtually strangers. Marriage requires more substantial foundation than admiration of character." "Does it?" He set down his cup with deliberate precision. "My parents' marriage was arranged with little more acquaintance than we currently share. They found contentment, if not passion. I believe we might achieve both, given time and mutual respect." The directness of his speech left Seraphine at a loss. Such plainness might be considered offensive from another man, yet from him it seemed a courtesy, a refusal to dress truth in the gauzy veils of social pretense. "You speak of this as though it were a business arrangement," she said finally. "All marriages are at their core. The difference lies in what commodities are exchanged." He paused, studying her reaction. "I offer security, position, and respect. You would provide companionship, intelligent management of my households, and guidance for my sister. Affection may develop naturally, but it need not be prerequisite." Seraphine rose, needing physical distance to process his extraordinary proposal. She moved to the window, gazing at the street below without really seeing it. "And if I were to decline this arrangement? Then you would remain Lady Lorne, and I would still request your assistance with my sister's debut, though it would be more complicated to arrange without the sanction of marriage." His voice remained level, betraying neither disappointment nor pressure. "The choice is entirely yours, and I require no immediate answer." She turned back to face him, searching his expression for any hint of mockery or deceit. Finding none, she asked the question that troubled her most. "Why me, Your Grace? London abounds with eligible ladies of higher birth and greater fortune." For the first time since entering her drawing room, the Duke hesitated, as though carefully considering his response. "Lady Lorne, Seraphine, if I may, do you believe that choices of consequence should be made on impulse or calculation?" The shift to her Christian name startled her, yet she found she did not object to the intimacy it implied. "I believe the best decisions arise from both heart and mind working in harmony." "Precisely." He nodded, seemingly pleased with her answer. "My interest in you began as calculation. I observed a woman of character mistreated by society's hypocrisy. I noted qualities that would benefit my household and sister. I recognized potential compatibility." Seraphine felt an inexplicable disappointment at the clinical nature of his explanation, though she could hardly fault his honesty. "However," he continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, "last night when you placed your hand in mine for that waltz, calculation gave way to something less definable. You moved with grace, despite your fear. You spoke with honesty, despite years of being silenced. You exhibited courage when others would have retreated." He rose to stand before her, close enough that she could see flecks of silver in his blue-gray eyes. "I find myself drawn to you, Lady Lorne, in ways that surpass practical considerations. That is the impulse beneath the calculation." The confession, delivered in his measured tone, affected her more profoundly than any passionate declaration might have done. It spoke of a man who recognized his own feelings with the same clarity he applied to business matters, and who valued her enough to express them plainly. "I see," she murmured, unsure how to respond to such directness. "Do you?" The Duke's gaze remained steady on hers. "Then perhaps you also see why I cannot offer you pretty words or romantic gestures. I am not fashioned for such things. What I offer instead is honesty, respect, and the promise that you would never again stand alone in a corner while others whispered behind their fans." The image he conjured, of herself abandoned at the edges of glittering ballrooms, struck Seraphine with painful accuracy. For 2 years she had endured such isolation, her grief compounded by social rejection. The Duke offered not merely escape but elevation, not just security but vindication. Yet at what cost to her independence? Limited though her circumstances were, they were hers alone. Marriage would place her fate in another's hands, hands belonging to a man whose reputation for austere control preceded him throughout London. "Your Grace, Alaric," he corrected gently. "If we are to consider joining our lives, we might at least address each other by name in private." "Alaric," she amended, the name foreign yet not unpleasant on her tongue. "I must ask, would this be a true marriage in all aspects?" A flash of something like admiration crossed his face at her forthrightness. "It would. I desire an heir, and I find you exceedingly appealing, Seraphine." The way he spoke her name, deliberate, almost caressing the syllables, sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the meager fire in the grate. "That said," he continued with characteristic directness, "I would never demand what you are unwilling to give. Ours would be a partnership, founded on mutual consent in all matters." Seraphine found herself studying his hands, strong, capable hands that had held hers with perfect pressure during their waltz, hands that might in another life cradle a child. Their child. The thought was both terrifying and strangely alluring. "You require time to consider," he stated rather than asked. "That is sensible. I shall call again in 3 days for your answer. Until then, I ask only that you reflect on this. What future do you envision for yourself if you decline?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered because they both knew the truth. Without family or fortune, her prospects were bleak. At best, she might secure a position as a paid companion to some elderly relation. At worst, her modest savings would eventually dwindle, forcing her to seek lodgings of decreasing respectability until she vanished entirely from society's notice. 3 days, she agreed quietly, though I wonder if a lifetime would be sufficient to fully consider such a proposition. Something close to a smile touched his lips. "A lifetime is precisely what I am offering, Seraphine. But 3 days will suffice for the initial decision." He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with an afterthought. "My sister arrives in London tomorrow. Regardless of your answer regarding marriage, would you be willing to meet her? Elara has spent too many years in country isolation. She could benefit from your counsel, even if given in friendship rather than as family." The request seemed so reasonable, so separate from the weightier question of marriage, that Seraphine found herself nodding. "Of course, I should be pleased to make her acquaintance." "Excellent. I shall bring her to call at 11. He hesitated, then added, "She knows nothing of my intention to remarry. I would prefer to address that matter only after your decision has been made." With that clarification, he bowed formally, the intimate moment having passed. "Until tomorrow, Lady Lorne. Until tomorrow, Your Grace." After he departed, Seraphine remained motionless in the center of her drawing room, the echo of his voice lingering in the suddenly empty space. What had just transpired seemed scarcely believable, that the Duke of Ravensdale, one of England's most eligible bachelors, had offered marriage to a widow of modest means and connections. Not out of love, she reminded herself firmly, out of practicality, with perhaps a touch of attraction. Yet wasn't that more honest than the pretty falsehoods most marriages were built upon? Mrs. Winters entered to clear the tea service, her expression alight with barely suppressed curiosity. "Shall I be preparing for changes in the household, my lady?" she inquired. With the license granted by 20 years' loyal service, Seraphine looked at her housekeeper, at the room with its faded elegance, at the copper fan that had returned to her by the Duke's attentiveness. 3 days to decide between continued independence in genteel poverty or a duchess's coronet with all its privileges and constraints. "Perhaps," she answered softly. "We shall see what tomorrow brings." Tomorrow brought Lady Elara Dregor, who proved to be nothing like the timid country Miss Seraphine had anticipated. At precisely 11, the Duke's carriage arrived carrying not only himself but a young woman, whose vibrant presence seemed to fill Seraphine's modest drawing room the moment she entered. "Lady Lorne," Elara exclaimed, extending both hands in greeting as though they were already intimate friends. "My brother has spoken of you with such admiration that I feel we are acquainted already. You must call me Elara, for I detest formality among friends, and I am certain we shall be the greatest of friends." Seraphine found herself smiling in genuine response to the girl's warmth. At perhaps 18, Elara possessed her brother's striking coloring, the same dark hair and blue-grey eyes, but where his features were stern, hers danced with animation. She was not conventionally beautiful, but her vivacity rendered her captivating nonetheless. "I am pleased to meet you, Lady Elara," Seraphine replied, accepting the offered hands. "Your brother speaks highly of you as well." "Alaric exaggerates my virtues and minimizes my faults," Elara said, with a conspiratorial glance toward her brother, who stood watching their interaction with uncharacteristic softness in his expression. "He believes me more accomplished than I am, and less willful than I truly am." "I believe you precisely as willful as you are," the Duke countered dryly. "Which is why I sought Lady Lorne's guidance for your debut. Someone must ensure you do not scandalize all of London within a fortnight." Elara laughed, a bright, uninhibited sound that seemed to transform the usually somber drawing room. "You see, Lady Lorne, he thinks me half wild when I am merely enthusiastic. 5 years confined to Thornwick Abbey would make anyone eager for society." Seraphine glanced at the Duke, noting the subtle tightening around his mouth at the mention of Thornwick. There was history there, something painful that lay beneath his sister's light tone. "Please be seated," Seraphine offered, gesturing to the chairs arranged before the fire. "And I believe we might dispense with formality, as you suggested. You must call me Seraphine." "Seraphine," Elara repeated with evident pleasure. "What a lovely name. Is it French in origin? I adore everything French, though Alaric insists Paris is overrated. Of course, he finds most things overrated except for books and horses." The Duke settled into a chair, observing his sister's enthusiasm with what appeared to be equal parts exasperation and fondness. "Elara, perhaps allow Lady Lorne," Seraphine, a moment to respond before charging ahead with 10 more observations. "Oh, yes, of course. I do tend to rush conversation, don't I? Mrs. Finch, my governess, always said my tongue moved faster than propriety allowed." Elara smoothed her skirts, making a visible effort to compose herself. "I apologize, Seraphine. Country isolation has left me rather unskilled in proper discourse." "There is nothing to apologize for," Seraphine assured her, finding the girl's natural exuberance refreshing after years among London's calculated social performances. "And yes, my name is of French extraction. My grandmother was from Normandy." Mrs. Winters entered with tea and the promised almond biscuits, which Elara accepted with undisguised delight. Once the housekeeper had withdrawn, their conversation turned to the upcoming season, Elara full of questions about what to expect, Seraphine providing gentle guidance based on her own experiences. "Will there truly be so many rules to remember?" Elara asked, her expression suddenly anxious. 3 dances maximum with the same gentleman, no walking in the gardens unchaperoned, conversation topics deemed suitable versus unsuitable. Society functions through its rituals, Seraphine explained. They may seem arbitrary, but each serves a purpose, primarily to protect young ladies from unfortunate entanglements or damaged reputations. "But they sound terribly restrictive," Elara protested. "Almost designed to prevent genuine connection." The Duke, who had remained largely silent during their exchange, spoke up. That is precisely their purpose, Ilara. Society is not structured to encourage genuine emotion, but rather advantageous alliances. Something in his tone, a subtle bitterness perhaps, caught Seraphine's attention. For a man proposing marriage based on practical considerations, he seemed oddly critical of the very system that facilitated such arrangements. Not all matches made within society's rules lack genuine feeling, Seraphine offered carefully. The structures exist to prevent hasty decisions, but they need not preclude authentic attachment. Did you find that to be true in your own experience? The Duke asked, his gaze intent upon her face. The personal nature of the question might have seemed impertinent from another, but from him, it felt like a continuation of their previous candor. I did, Seraphine answered honestly. James and I met at Lady Westmoreland's musicale. We observed every propriety during our courtship, yet our affection was no less real for having developed within society's bounds. Ilara leaned forward eagerly. How romantic. Was it love at first sight? Did you know immediately that he was the one? Seraphine smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. Not immediately, no. He was a naval officer, handsome in his uniform and possessing excellent manners, but I had met many such gentlemen. It was only later, during a conversation about poetry, that I glimpsed the mind behind the manners. That was when my interest truly began. The mind behind the manners, the Duke repeated thoughtfully. An apt phrase. Too often society judges the latter, while ignoring the former. Precisely why I dread all these rules, Ilara sighed. How am I to discover anyone's true character when conversation is limited to weather and the latest operatic performance? There are ways, Seraphine assured her. Observe how a gentleman treats those he considers beneath him. Servants, elderly relations, wallflowers at a ball. Note whether he listens or merely waits to speak, and pay particular attention to his behavior when he believes himself unobserved. The Duke's eyebrows rose slightly. Sage advice that few chaperones would think to offer. Most concern themselves solely with maintaining physical propriety. Physical proximity is easily monitored, Seraphine replied. Character requires more discerning observation. Then I am fortunate indeed to have you as my guide, Ilara declared, reaching impulsively to clasp Seraphine's hand. Alaric was right. You are precisely what I need for this season. Seraphine felt a moment's guilt at the girl's enthusiasm, knowing she had not yet decided whether to accept the Duke's proposal. If she declined, this promising connection would become awkward at best, impossible at worst. As though sensing her thoughts, the Duke steered the conversation toward practicalities. Lady Lorne has graciously agreed to advise you, Ilara, but the specific arrangements remain to be determined. For now, I suggest we focus on preparing for Lady Harwick's dinner next week, where you will make your first semi-public appearance. Lady Harwick? Seraphine questioned, surprised. I would not have thought her acquainted with Lady Ilara. She is not, the Duke confirmed. However, after our dance caused such a stir, she was quick to extend an invitation to meet my dear sister. Social curiosity is a powerful motivator. How calculating you are, brother, Ilara teased. Using your mysterious waltz to secure invitations for your provincial sister. The waltz was not calculated, he responded, his gaze meeting Seraphine's briefly. But I see no reason not to capitalize on its consequences. The look that passed between them held echoes of their previous conversation, of impulse beneath calculation, of choices weighted with consequence. Seraphine felt a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with social strategy and everything to do with the man himself. Will you attend Lady Harwick's dinner as well, Seraphine? Ilara asked hopefully. Before Seraphine could respond, the Duke intervened. Lady Lorne's attendance would be most beneficial to your introduction, Ilara, but we must not presume upon her schedule. Perhaps she already has commitments for that evening. The subtle reminder of her autonomy, that she had not yet committed to any arrangement with him, was both courteous and pointed. He would not press her, but neither would he pretend the question of their potential marriage was inconsequential. I have no prior engagements, Seraphine admitted, though I have not received an invitation from Lady Harwick. You will, the Duke stated with certainty. By this evening's post, I should imagine. Your presence has become essential to satisfy the ton's curiosity about our connection. Ilara looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents she did not fully understand. Is there a particular reason Lady Harwick would be curious about your acquaintance? Beyond the waltz, I mean. A moment of silence followed, as Seraphine and the Duke exchanged glances, neither quite willing to fabricate an explanation nor ready to reveal the truth. Your brother was kind enough to rescue me from an awkward situation, Seraphine finally offered. Society finds such gallantry noteworthy, especially from someone of his standing. Ilara's eyes widened with interest. Was it very romantic? Like something from a novel? The Duke cleared his throat. It was a simple courtesy that society, in its endless appetite for drama, has chosen to exaggerate. Now, shall we discuss more pressing matters, such as your wardrobe for the season? I understand certain purchases will be necessary. The deliberate change of subject was successful. Ilara immediately launched into an enthusiastic inventory of her existing gowns and their deficiencies for London society. As she spoke, Seraphine found herself studying the Duke, noting how he listened to his sister's chatter with genuine attention despite its mundane subject matter. It revealed a patience and tenderness at odds with his austere public persona. When Ilara paused for breath, the Duke seized the opportunity to advance his agenda. Lady Lorne's guidance would be invaluable in selecting appropriate attire. Perhaps you might accompany Ilara to the Modiste tomorrow, if your schedule permits. The request was ostensibly directed at assisting his sister, yet Seraphine recognized it as a strategic move in their private negotiation. By involving her in Ilara's preparations, he was offering a glimpse into the life that awaited, should she accept his proposal. A life of purpose and connection after years of isolation. I would be delighted, Seraphine found herself saying, despite her unresolved decision. Madame Laurent on Bond Street is discreet yet fashionable. We could visit her establishment at 11 if that suits. Ilara clapped her hands in delight. Oh yes, Alaric promised I might have new gowns, but I confess I had no notion where to begin. You are an absolute angel to assist me, Seraphine. The Duke's expression softened as he observed his sister's happiness. It is settled then. I shall have the carriage bring Ilara to you tomorrow morning. His gaze shifted to Seraphine, warming subtly. Your kindness is most appreciated. The words were conventional, but his tone conveyed deeper meaning. Gratitude not merely for assisting Ilara, but for considering his unconventional proposal with an open mind. In that moment, Seraphine realized the magnitude of what he offered, not just security or status, but partnership with a man capable of profound devotion, as evidenced by his care for his sister. As their visit concluded, and the Dragors prepared to depart, Ilara embraced Seraphine impulsively. I feel certain we shall become the best of friends, the girl whispered. Alaric has excellent judgment in most things, but especially in people. The Duke offered a more restrained farewell, bowing over Seraphine's hand with formal correctness. Yet as he straightened, he spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. 2 days remain. Consider not only what you would gain, but what we might build together. Long after their carriage had disappeared down the street, Seraphine stood at her window, his words echoing in her mind. What they might build together. Not a transaction, but a creation. Not merely a practical arrangement, but a shared future. For the first time since receiving his extraordinary proposal, Seraphine allowed herself to imagine saying yes. The morning dawned bright and crisp, a welcome respite from London's typical winter gloom. Seraphine woke early, her thoughts immediately turning to the day ahead, shopping with Lady Ilara, followed by another night of deliberation regarding the Duke's proposal. Tomorrow she would give her answer, irrevocably altering the course of her life regardless of which path she chose. Mrs. Winters entered with a breakfast tray and the morning's post, including, as the Duke had predicted, an invitation from Lady Harwick for her dinner party the following week. More callers expected today? The housekeeper inquired, drawing back the curtains to admit the winter sunlight. Lady Ilara Dragor will arrive at 10:30, Seraphine replied, examining Lady Harwick's ornate invitation with wry amusement. Just days ago the woman had barely acknowledged her presence. Now she wrote as though they were intimate acquaintances. We shall be visiting Madame Laurent's establishment on Bond Street. I'll have your blue pelisse brushed and ready, Mrs. Winters said, nodding with approval. A fine day for you to be seen in society again, my lady, and in such distinguished company. The housekeeper's words, though well-intentioned, highlighted the transactional nature of London's social calculations. Yesterday, Seraphine had been invisible. Today, with the Duke's attention, she was sought after. Should she marry him, doors would open effortlessly before her. Should she decline, those same doors would likely close once more, perhaps even more firmly than before. Was she prepared to build her future upon such a precarious foundation? To accept elevation, based not on her own merits, but on a man's decision to champion her cause? Yet there was more to the Duke's offer than mere social rehabilitation. There was Ilara's genuine warmth, the possibility of meaningful purpose, and the Duke himself, a man whose directness and integrity set him apart from society's usual practitioners. Seraphine was still weighing these considerations when Lady Alara's arrival was announced. The girl swept into the morning room with characteristic enthusiasm, dressed in a stylish but somewhat dated traveling costume. "Seraphine! I've been counting the hours until our expedition," she declared, embracing her newfound friend with unrestrained affection. "Alaric gave me an absolutely scandalous allowance for new gowns. He said proper attire is an investment in my future, though I suspect he simply wishes to ensure I don't embarrass him at Lady Harwick's dinner." Seraphine smiled, charmed by Alara's candor. "I'm certain your brother wants you to feel confident in your appearance. First impressions carry significant weight in London society. So I've been told repeatedly," Alara said, rolling her eyes good-naturedly. "Alaric has lectured me thoroughly on the importance of conducting myself with appropriate dignity, as if I planned to swing from the chandeliers or challenge gentlemen to sword fights." The mental image was so absurd that Seraphine laughed aloud, a spontaneous sound she scarcely recognized as her own. How long had it been since genuine mirth had escaped her lips? Not since James's death, certainly. "Do you know," she said, still smiling, "I believe your brother fears precisely such scenarios. He strikes me as someone who anticipates catastrophe in order to prevent it." Ilara's expression softened with affection. "He does worry excessively. Our parents' deaths left him with responsibilities beyond his years, and then there was the business with—" She stopped abruptly, a shadow crossing her animated features. "But that's ancient history. Shall we depart for Madame Laurent's? I'm positively desperate to see what London modistes consider fashionable these days." The sudden shift suggested painful memories that Ilara was not ready to share. Seraphine did not press, merely gathering her pelisse and reticule. "Indeed we shall. Madame Laurent creates the most exquisite evening gowns, though her prices reflect her popularity." "Alaric said cost was no object," Ilara replied, her spirits rebounding quickly. "In fact, he specifically mentioned that you should consider selecting something for yourself as well, as a token of gratitude for your assistance." Seraphine paused in the act of pulling on her gloves. "That is most generous, but entirely unnecessary. I require no compensation for the pleasure of your company." "Oh, it wasn't my idea," Ilara assured her. "Alaric insisted. He said something rather peculiar about wanting to see you in blue silk again." Her expression turned quizzical. "Have you worn blue silk in his presence before?" He made it sound significant. Heat rose to Seraphine's cheeks. The Duke had noticed not only her isolation at Lady Harwick's ball, but also the precise colour and fabric of her gown. Such observation revealed an attention to detail, to her specifically, that transcended mere social calculation. "I wore a blue silk gown the night we danced," she admitted, busying herself with her buttons to hide her confusion. "I'm surprised he would remember such a trivial detail." Ilara's eyes widened with interest. "Alaric never notices ladies' gowns. In fact, he scarcely notices ladies at all, which has been the despair of countless mamas seeking advantageous matches. Yet he not only danced with you, breaking his own rule of years, but remembers the colour of your dress? How intriguing." The girl's tone held playful speculation that made Seraphine increasingly uncomfortable. How much had the Duke shared with his sister regarding their potential arrangement? Did Ilara suspect the true nature of their connection, or did she simply see romantic possibilities where none might exist? "I believe your brother was being polite," Seraphine said carefully. "Now shall we depart? Madame Laurent's establishment will be busy at this hour, and we should secure her attention early." The Duke's carriage awaited them outside, an elegant conveyance with the Ravensdale crest discreetly emblazoned on its doors. The footman assisted them inside with proper deference, and Seraphine found herself noting the quality of the equipage, the fine leather upholstery, the subtle yet luxurious appointments. This too would be part of her life should she accept the Duke's proposal. As they travelled toward Bond Street, Ilara chatted happily about her expectations for the season, the balls she hoped to attend, the sights of London she wished to experience, the friendships she anticipated forming. Her enthusiasm was contagious, reminding Seraphine of her own excitement before her first season 8 years earlier. "You must think me terribly provincial," Ilara said suddenly, breaking off her description of a particularly anticipated musicale. "Alaric says my country upbringing shows in my excessive enthusiasm." "Your enthusiasm is refreshing," Seraphine assured her. "Society can be coldly calculating. genuine delight in simple pleasures is a rare and precious quality. Ilara studied her with unexpected seriousness. You understand, don't you, what it means to stand outside the circle, observing rather than participating? That's why Alaric was drawn to you. The observation was startlingly perceptive from one so young and seemingly sheltered. What makes you say that? Seraphine asked carefully. Because my brother, too, has always been an observer, rather than a participant. Ilara's usual animation gave way to thoughtful reflection. Even before the scandal forced our retreat to Thornwick, Alaric preferred the edges of ballrooms to their centres. He watches, assesses, and rarely engages unless absolutely necessary. A scandal? Seraphine echoed before she could stop herself. Ilara's eyes widened. He hasn't told you about the duel and why we left London 5 years ago. We have not discussed his past, Seraphine admitted, both curious and concerned about what she might learn. Nor did I wish to pry into matters he might prefer to keep private. Ilara bit her lip, suddenly looking younger than her 18 years. Perhaps I shouldn't have mentioned it. Alaric is intensely private about that period. But if you and he are to be— She hesitated, searching for the right word. Friends, then you should understand why some in society still regard him with suspicion. Seraphine remained silent, unwilling to press for confidences that might betray the Duke's trust, yet equally unwilling to discourage Ilara from sharing what might prove vital information for her decision. The carriage is slowing, Ilara observed, glancing out the window. We've arrived at Bond Street. Shall we continue this conversation later, perhaps over tea after our shopping is complete, if you believe it appropriate? Seraphine replied cautiously. I would never wish to intrude upon family matters. Ilara reached across to squeeze her hand. You don't intrude, you illuminate. Already I feel as though I've known you for years rather than hours. Alaric was right about you, as he so often is about people, if rarely about himself. Madame Laurent's establishment proved every bit as exclusive as Seraphine had promised. The French modiste, a formidable woman of indeterminate age, initially greeted them with cool politeness that warmed considerably upon learning Ilara's identity. The Duke of Ravensdale's sister, but of course we shall create an entire trousseau worthy of your debut, she declared, ushering them into a private salon where champagne and delicate pastries awaited. His Grace's patronage is most welcome. And Lady Lorne, how delightful to see you in my humble establishment once more. Seraphine doubted Madame Laurent found anything humble about her fashionable premises, but she merely smiled and allowed the woman to fawn appropriately. For the next 2 hours they were treated to a parade of fabrics, designs and accessories, with Ilara growing increasingly animated as she selected materials for morning dresses, afternoon calls, dinner parties and balls. What do you think of this silk for Lady Harwick's dinner? She asked, holding a length of emerald green against her dark hair. Too bold for a first appearance? The colour suits you admirably, Seraphine replied, but perhaps in a slightly more subdued shade for this particular occasion. Lady Harwick's dinners tend toward formal elegance rather than dramatic display. Madame Laurent immediately produced a softer sage green that retained the flattering tone while conforming to more conservative tastes. Perfect for a young lady's introduction to society, she pronounced, with silver embroidery at the bodice and perhaps a touch of darker green ribbon as accent. As Ilara consulted with Madame's assistant regarding specific design elements, the modiste turned her attention to Seraphine. And for you, Lady Lorne, His Grace mentioned you might select something as well. Perhaps this celestial blue silk? It would complement your complexion magnificently. Seraphine hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. The blue silk was indeed beautiful, a shade that reminded her of summer skies, with a subtle sheen that caught the light exquisitely. As a duchess, such fabrics would be her due. As a widow of limited means, they represented an extravagance she could ill afford, even as a gift. His Grace is most generous, she said carefully, but I could not possibly— Alaric would be positively wounded if you refused, Ilara interrupted, returning from her consultation. Besides, Madame Laurent has already set aside the fabric at his specific instruction, something about replacing a gown you've outgrown with one more worthy of your current station. The words might have seemed presumptuous, even offensive, had they come from anyone but Alaric Dragor. From him, they were simply characteristic directness, addressing practical matters without social pretense. He had observed her wearing an outdated gown and sought to remedy the situation in the most efficient manner possible. In that case, Seraphine conceded, I should not wish to disappoint His Grace, though a simpler design would be preferable. Madame Laurent's eyes gleamed with professional challenge. Simple yet elegant. Perhaps a modified Grecian style with draping that accentuates your figure without ostentation. For Lady Harwick's dinner, I presume. Before Seraphine could correct this assumption, Ilara clapped her hands enthusiastically. Yes, we shall attend together. A perfect opportunity to introduce the gown and confound those who whispered about Seraphine at the last ball. Ilara, Seraphine began cautiously, your brother and I have not yet finalized any arrangements regarding your chaperoning duties, I know. Ilara interrupted smoothly, with a significant glance that suggested they should not discuss personal matters before the modiste. But surely attending the dinner together would be sensible regardless, unless you've reconsidered assisting me entirely. The question was posed lightly, but Seraphine detected genuine anxiety beneath Ilara's breezy manner. The girl had formed an attachment with surprising speed, and now feared rejection, a vulnerability Seraphine understood all too well from her own years of social isolation. Of course I haven't reconsidered, she assured Ilara. I shall be delighted to accompany you to Lady Harwick's dinner, regardless of other considerations. Relief softened Ilara's features. Excellent. Then the blue silk is decided. Madame Laurent, when might we expect delivery of our gowns? The dinner is merely 8 days hence. For the Duke of Ravensdale's sister and special friend. We shall work miracles, my dear Lady Ilara. Your gowns will be ready for final fitting in 6 days, with delivery the morning of the dinner party. As they concluded their business and prepared to depart, Seraphine found herself wondering at Madame Laurent's choice of words. Special friend implied a relationship already established in the public mind, a connection beyond casual acquaintance, but not yet formalized through engagement or marriage. Had the Duke deliberately fostered such an impression, or was it merely the natural conclusion drawn from their waltz and subsequent association? Once settled back in the carriage, Ilara's expression turned serious once more. About our interrupted conversation, she began hesitantly. I promised to explain about the scandal that drove us from London. Seraphine studied the younger woman's troubled features. Only if you feel it appropriate, Ilara. I would never wish to cause you or your brother discomfort. Ilara drew a deep breath. 5 years ago, when I was barely 13, a certain Viscount Harlow began paying particular attention to me at social gatherings. I was flattered by his interest. He was handsome, titled, and seemed genuinely kind. What I failed to recognize in my childish naivety was that his attentions were grossly inappropriate, given our respective ages and positions. A chill ran through Seraphine as she began to understand the nature of the scandal. Ilara, you need not— Please, the girl interrupted quietly. You should know this if you are to be part of our lives in any capacity. Seraphine nodded, allowing her to continue. Alaric discovered Harlow attempting to lure me into Lord Westmoreland's conservatory during a musicale. Words were exchanged, accusations made. Harlow claimed I had encouraged his attentions, a lie that nonetheless found fertile ground among gossips eager for scandal. Honor demanded satisfaction, and Alaric called him out. A duel, Seraphine murmured, the Duke's scar suddenly taking on new significance. Ilara nodded grimly. Pistols at dawn in Richmond Park. Harlow's shot grazed Alaric's face. Alaric's bullet found Harlow's shoulder, a wound serious enough to end the contest, but not the man's life. By afternoon, half of London was whispering about the Duke who had tried to murder a Viscount over his improper sister. But surely once the true circumstances became known— They never did, Ilara interrupted, her voice tight with old pain. Alaric refused to circulate the full story, believing it would only further damage my reputation. Instead, he removed us both from society entirely, retreating to Thornwick Abbey until the scandal faded and I reached an age appropriate for proper introduction. 5 years, Seraphine said softly. He sacrificed 5 years of his own social standing to protect yours. That is who my brother is, Ilara replied simply, a man who places duty and family above all else, including his own happiness. When he makes a commitment, it is absolute and unshakable. The carriage slowed as they approached Seraphine's townhouse, but the conversation had shifted her perception of the Duke in ways that demanded further reflection. This was a man who had risked his life and reputation to protect his sister's honor, who had willingly accepted social exile rather than expose her to further scrutiny. What might such a man offer to a wife he had vowed to protect and respect? Thank you for sharing this with me, Seraphine said quietly as the footman opened the carriage door. It cannot have been easy to revisit such painful memories. Alaric would not have told you himself, Ilara replied. His pride would forbid it. Yet I believe you deserve to know the man behind the title, the brother I know, not merely the Duke that London sees." As Seraphine descended from the carriage, Elara leaned forward impulsively. "Will you come to tea tomorrow, before you give Alaric your answer regarding the chaperoning arrangements?" The phrasing confirmed Seraphine's suspicion that Elara knew, or at least strongly suspected, the true nature of her brother's proposal. Yet the girl asked for tea, not an acceptance, or connection, regardless of Seraphine's ultimate decision. "I should be delighted," Seraphine replied sincerely. "Shall we say 3 o'clock?" "Perfect." Elara's smile returned in full force. "Until tomorrow then, Seraphine." As the carriage pulled away, Seraphine stood for a moment on her doorstep, contemplating the complex man who had offered her his name, his protection, and a place within his closely guarded family circle. No longer was he merely the stern duke who had rescued her from social humiliation. He was Alaric, a brother who had sacrificed years of his life to preserve his sister's future. The revelation did not simplify her decision. If anything, it rendered it more consequential. To refuse him now would not merely be declining a convenient arrangement, but rejecting a man of profound integrity and commitment. That evening, a package arrived from Ravensdale House, not the Duke's London residence, but rather his principal country estate. Inside, Seraphine discovered a slim volume, bound in blue leather, its pages filled with exquisite botanical illustrations. A note in the Duke's distinctive handwriting accompanied it. "Lady Lorne, during our conversation you mentioned your late husband's interest in natural philosophy. This volume of coastal flora was published by the Royal Society last autumn and may not have come to your attention. I thought it might serve as a fitting remembrance of Captain Lorne's scientific curiosity. I shall call tomorrow at 2, as arranged, for your response to my proposal. Whatever your decision, please know that my esteem for your character remains unchanged." Ravensdale Seraphine traced her fingers over the beautifully rendered coastal flowers, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. The Duke had not only remembered her casual mention of James's botanical interests, but had selected a volume specifically connected to her late husband's naval career and scientific pursuits. This was not the gesture of a man proposing a cold business arrangement. It demonstrated consideration, attention, and respect for her past, qualities she had not dared hope for in a second marriage, should she ever contemplate such a step. She carried the book to her bedchamber, where she spent hours examining its illustrations and reflecting on the choice that lay before her. By the time dawn broke, casting pale winter light across her counterpane, Seraphine had made her decision. The Duke arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, as promised. He entered her drawing room with characteristic formality, though Seraphine thought she detected a certain tension in his bearing that had not been present during previous visits. "Lady Lorne," he greeted her, bowing over her hand. "I trust you are well today?" "Very well, thank you," she replied, gesturing toward the chairs arranged before the fire. "And most appreciative of the botanical volume you sent. It was remarkably thoughtful." He settled into the chair opposite hers, his posture perfect yet not entirely at ease. "I am pleased it met with your approval. Elara mentioned that your shopping expedition yesterday was successful." "Most productive. Madame Laurent proved as talented as her reputation suggests." Seraphine paused, then added with gentle directness, "Though I believe neither of us wishes to spend our limited time discussing fashion." A brief smile touched his lips, the closest to genuine amusement she had yet observed from him. "Indeed not. You have always possessed a refreshing directness, Lady Lorne. It is among the qualities I find most admirable in your character. As you have demonstrated similar directness in our interactions, I shall continue in that vein," Seraphine replied, folding her hands in her lap to conceal their slight trembling. "I have considered your proposal with the seriousness it deserves." The Duke's expression remained composed, though she noted a subtle tightening around his eyes. "And have you reached a decision?" "I have." Seraphine drew a steadying breath. "Before I share it, however, I wish to ensure that we understand each other completely. You offer marriage based on mutual respect and compatible temperaments, with the possibility, though not the requirement, of deeper attachment developing over time. You seek a duchess to manage your households, assist with your sister's introduction to society, and potentially provide an heir. Is that an accurate summary?" "It is," he confirmed, his gaze steady on hers, "though perhaps incomplete in one aspect." "And what might that be?" "I also seek a partner," he said quietly, "someone with whom to share both responsibilities and satisfactions. Someone whose judgment I trust and whose company I value." These considerations extend beyond the practical benefits I initially outlined. The admission, subtle yet significant, further confirmed what Seraphine had begun to suspect, that beneath the Duke's pragmatic exterior lay deeper currents of feeling than he readily expressed. "I appreciate your clarification," she said. "It leads naturally to a question I must ask before giving my answer. Why have you not remarried during these past 5 years? Surely there have been opportunities, women of appropriate rank and fortune who would have gladly accepted your title." If the Duke was surprised by her inquiry, he concealed it well. "There have indeed been such opportunities," he acknowledged. "I declined them because I observed in each potential match the same hollowness that characterized most aristocratic marriages of my acquaintance, alliances built on ambition rather than compatibility, maintained through mutual tolerance rather than genuine respect." He leaned forward slightly, his expression more open than she had yet witnessed. "Having seen my parents' cordial indifference to each other, I determined that any marriage I contracted would require more substantial foundation. When society's demands forced our retreat to Thornwick, the question became temporarily irrelevant. Upon our return, I found my standards unchanged, but my patience for social pretense significantly diminished. And then we danced," Seraphine said softly. "And then we danced," he agreed, the memory reflected in his eyes. "A simple gesture that revealed more of your character than a dozen conventional courtships might have done. You accepted my hand, despite fear of further mockery. You moved with dignity among those who had scorned you. You demonstrated resilience where others would have shown bitterness. In those moments, I recognized qualities I had sought without truly expecting to find." His words affected her more profoundly than any practiced declaration of romantic sentiment could have done. They offered not flattery, but recognition, an acknowledgement of her inner strength rather than superficial attributes. "I am honored by your assessment," Seraphine said, her voice steady despite her quickening pulse, "and having considered all aspects of your proposal, including our brief yet meaningful acquaintance, I have decided to accept." For a moment, the Duke remained perfectly still, as though her words required careful processing. Then something in his severe countenance softened almost imperceptibly. "You are certain? I would not have you commit yourself without complete conviction." "I'm certain," she confirmed, "not because your offer represents security, though I would be disingenuous to pretend that consideration holds no weight, but because I believe we might indeed build something of value together, something founded on mutual respect and shared purpose, as you described." He rose then and approached her chair, extending his hand to help her to her feet. When she stood before him, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said, opening it to reveal a ring of remarkable craftsmanship, a sapphire of exceptional clarity surrounded by small diamonds in an antique platinum setting. "She was a woman of uncommon sense and dignity, much like yourself. I believe she would approve of its new bearer." Seraphine gazed at the ring, momentarily speechless at its beauty and significance. This was no hastily purchased token. It was a family heirloom, suggesting that the Duke viewed their marriage as a true union rather than a convenient arrangement. "It's beautiful," she murmured, as he removed the ring from its velvet nest. "May I?" he asked, holding the ring poised before her left hand. Seraphine nodded, extending her fingers. As he slipped the ring into place, a perfect fit, as though designed for her, she was struck by the solemnity of the moment. No witnesses, no grand declarations, merely two people entering a covenant with clear eyes and mutual purpose. "It suits you," he observed, his gaze moving from the ring to her face with evident satisfaction, "as I believed it would." Their hands remained joined, neither immediately pulling away from this first deliberate contact. Seraphine was acutely aware of his proximity, of the subtle scent of cedar that seemed to accompany him, of the unexpected warmth in eyes she had initially thought coldly assessing. "Alaric," she said, using his given name for the first time, "I shall endeavor to be worthy of both your trust and your grandmother's legacy." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, at the sound of his name on her lips, followed by unmistakable pleasure. "Seraphine," he replied, his voice deepening slightly, "I have no doubt whatsoever of your worthiness." The moment stretched between them, charged with potential. Then, with careful deliberation, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both formally proper and unexpectedly intimate. "We must discuss practical matters," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "The announcement, the ceremony, Your removal to Ravensdale House. Yes, of course, she agreed, returning to her seat with a composure that belied her racing thoughts. Though perhaps we might first inform Lady Alara. I am to take tea with her at 3 o'clock, and I believe she would be disappointed to learn of our engagement through formal channels. The Duke smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his austere features with surprising warmth. You anticipate her reaction perfectly. She will be overjoyed. She has developed quite an attachment to you in remarkably short order. The feeling is mutual, Seraphine admitted. Your sister possesses a rare combination of enthusiasm and perception. She credits you with excellent judgment in people, though I suspect her own discernment is equally acute. It is, he agreed, resuming his seat opposite her, though occasionally overshadowed by her exuberance. You balance her well, another quality that recommends you for the role you have accepted. They spent the next hour discussing arrangements with practical efficiency. The Duke, Alaric, as she was learning to think of him, proposed a small ceremony at St. George's in Hanover Square within 3 weeks, followed by a brief honeymoon at his estate in Kent before the season commenced in earnest. Unless you prefer a longer engagement, he inquired, attentive to her preferences despite his evident desire for prompt resolution. Seraphine considered the question honestly. A longer engagement might allow for deeper acquaintance before marriage, yet it would also subject them to increased scrutiny and speculation. Given their unconventional beginning, perhaps the most dignified course was indeed to proceed directly to matrimony, allowing their relationship to develop within the privacy of established union. 3 weeks seems appropriate, she decided. Long enough for proper arrangements, but not so extended as to invite unnecessary gossip. My thoughts, precisely, he agreed, with evident approval. I shall speak with the vicar tomorrow and secure the necessary license. Special circumstances permit expedited proceedings when both parties are of age and fully consented. As their discussion concluded, the mantel clock chimed 2:30. Alaric rose, preparing to depart. I shall send my carriage for you at 2:45 to convey you to Ravensdale House for tea with Alara. If it meets with your approval, we might inform her together of our engagement. That would be perfect, Seraphine replied, rising as well. He moved toward the door, then hesitated, turning back with an expression of unusual uncertainty. There is one matter we have not addressed directly, he said, his tone carefully measured. The physical aspect of our union. Seraphine felt heat rise to her cheeks, despite her determination to approach all aspects of their arrangement with mature consideration. Yes, I meant what I said regarding mutual consent in all matters, he continued, maintaining a respectful distance between them. Marriage grants certain legal rights, but I consider moral obligation superior to legal entitlement. You need never fear unwelcome advances. The delicacy with which he addressed such an intimate subject, his evident concern for her comfort and agency, touched Seraphine deeply. I appreciate your reassurance, she said quietly. Though I entered my first marriage innocently, I am not ignorant of what matrimony entails. I accepted your proposal with full understanding of all its potential dimensions. Something kindled in his gaze, a controlled heat that suggested passion carefully governed rather than absent altogether. Understanding is one thing, he said, his voice lower than before. Desire quite another. I would have both present before our union is fully consummated. The distinction, so honestly expressed, revealed yet another facet of the complex man she had agreed to marry. Not merely practical, dutiful, and honorable, but also considerate of her emotional readiness for physical intimacy. It was a consideration few husbands would think to offer, particularly in a match founded primarily on compatibility rather than romantic attachment. Thank you, she said simply, unable to articulate more fully the effect his words had upon her. He bowed, his formal courtesy returning as their personal discussion concluded. Until 3 then, Seraphine. Until 3, she echoed, watching as he departed with his characteristic measured stride. When the front door closed behind him, Seraphine found herself staring at the sapphire now adorning her left hand, visible evidence of the extraordinary turn her life had taken in mere days, from scorned widow to future duchess, from social isolation to family connection, from empty existence to purposeful partnership. The transformation seemed almost too dramatic to be real. Yet the weight of the ring upon her finger was tangible proof that she had not dreamed the Duke's proposal, nor her acceptance. By this time tomorrow, all of London would know that Lady Seraphine Lorne was to become the Duchess of Ravensdale, a social elevation that would confound every whisper, silence every mockery, and rewrite her story in ways she had never dared imagine. For the first time since receiving news of James's ship, Seraphine faced the future not with resignation, but with genuine hope. Ravensdale House stood in imposing grandeur on Grosvenor Square, its Portland stone facade speaking of centuries of aristocratic lineage. As the Duke's carriage delivered Seraphine to its imposing entrance, she felt a momentary flutter of apprehension. This magnificent dwelling would soon be her home, at least during the London season, and its splendor reflected responsibilities she had yet to fully contemplate. The door opened before she reached the final step, a dignified butler bowing deeply as she approached. "Lady Lorne," he greeted her with perfect deference. "His Grace and Lady Alara await you in the blue drawing-room. May I escort you, my lady?" "Thank you," Seraphine replied, surrendering her pelisse to a waiting footman. As she followed the butler through the entrance hall, she could not help but admire the understated elegance of the ducal residence. Unlike many aristocratic homes that displayed wealth through ostentatious decoration, Ravensdale House combined grandeur with restraint. Fine art carefully selected, rather than merely accumulated, furniture of exquisite craftsmanship rather than gaudy excess. The blue drawing-room lived up to its name, its walls covered in silk damask of celestial blue that reminded Seraphine of the fabric she had selected at Madame Laurent's establishment. Tall windows overlooked the private garden at the rear of the house, admitting winter sunshine that gleamed on polished surfaces and illuminated the room's tasteful appointments. "Seraphine!" Alara exclaimed, rising from her seat by the fire as the butler announced their visitor. "I've been counting the minutes. Alaric has been absolutely inscrutable all afternoon, refusing to explain why he insisted on accompanying me to tea, rather than attending to his usual business matters." The Duke himself stood as Seraphine entered, his expression warming visibly at the sight of her. "Lady Lorne," he greeted her formally, though his eyes conveyed a more personal welcome. "I trust the carriage was comfortable." "Perfectly so, Your Grace," she replied, noting that they had reverted to formal address in the presence of servants. Once the butler had withdrawn and the door closed behind him, however, Alaric's manner softened. "Seraphine," he said, crossing to take her hand, the left one she noticed, his thumb briefly brushing over the sapphire ring now adorning her finger. "Would you care for tea? Or perhaps we might share our news with Alara first, as her curiosity appears to be reaching explosive proportions." Alara's gaze darted between them, fixing with sudden intensity on Seraphine's hand, where it rested in her brother's grasp. Her eyes widened dramatically as she spotted the glittering evidence of their engagement. "Oh!" she gasped, hands flying to her mouth. "Oh, are you... Alaric, have you finally..." The Duke's lips twitched with suppressed amusement at his sister's incoherence. "Perhaps you might complete at least one of those questions, Alara, so that we might answer it properly." "You're engaged!" she exclaimed, abandoning all pretense of composure as she rushed forward to embrace Seraphine enthusiastically. "I knew it. I suspected from the moment you danced with her that something extraordinary was happening. Alaric never dances, never, yet he waltzed with you before all of London society as though it were the most natural thing in the world." Seraphine returned the girl's embrace, charmed by her unrestrained delight. "Your brother has indeed done me the honor of proposing marriage," she confirmed, "and I have accepted." Alara released her only to seize both their hands, her expression radiant with joy. "This is perfect, absolutely perfect. When is the wedding to be? Where shall you live? Will you be married before the season properly begins? Oh, Alaric, you clever man, you've secured the most wonderful sister for me just when I need her most. If you would pause for breath occasionally, we might address your questions in sequence," the Duke observed dryly, though his expression remained indulgent. "The wedding will take place at St. George's in 3 weeks' time. Lady Lorne, Seraphine, will divide her time between Ravensdale House during the season and Thornwick Abbey thereafter, as circumstances and preferences dictate. And yes, the ceremony will precede your formal introduction to society, allowing her to assist with your debut as a member of our family rather than a hired companion." "Hired companion indeed," Alara scoffed, leading Seraphine to the sofa and pulling her down beside her, as though that transparent fiction could have lasted more than a fortnight. "I knew from the moment you mentioned her name that your intentions were matrimonial. You never noticed, ladies, yet suddenly you were waltzing and arranging shopping expeditions and sending botanical books at all hours?" Seraphine glanced at Alaric, startled by Alara's revelation. "You mentioned me to your sister before we met at Lady Harwick's ball." A hint of colour touched the Duke's cheekbones, the first sign of discomposure she had observed in him. I may have made a passing reference to an intriguing widow who had maintained her dignity despite society's deplorable treatment, he admitted. Ilara, with her romantic sensibilities, naturally exaggerates both the frequency and significance of such remarks. 3 times in one breakfast, Ilara confided to Seraphine in a stage whisper, he mentioned your remarkable composure and admirable resilience until I was positively desperate to meet this paragon of feminine virtue. The Duke cleared his throat, visibly discomforted by his sister's revelations. Perhaps we might turn to more practical matters. The announcement will appear in tomorrow's Times, but until then, I suggest we maintain discretion regarding the engagement. Lady Harwick's dinner will provide an appropriate setting for your first public appearance as my affianced bride. Lady Harwick will be apoplectic with envy, Ilara predicted with unconcealed satisfaction. After treating Seraphine so coldly at her ball, she must now welcome her as the future Duchess of Ravensdale. Oh, I shall treasure her expression for all eternity. Ilara, Alaric chided, vindictiveness is unbecoming in a young lady of your station. It isn't vindictiveness, merely appreciation for poetic justice, Ilara countered cheerfully. Besides, you cannot claim you won't derive some satisfaction from the ton's collective astonishment. You've always enjoyed confounding social expectations. A servant entered with the tea tray, temporarily halting their conversation. As Seraphine accepted a cup from Ilara's hands, she found herself studying the dynamic between brother and sister with newfound interest. Beneath Alaric's stern exterior lay genuine affection, evident in the softening of his gaze whenever it rested on Ilara. For her part, Ilara clearly adored her brother despite, or perhaps because of, his austere manner, treating his formal pronouncements with affectionate irreverence that few others would dare attempt. Soon Seraphine would be part of this close family circle, not an outsider or temporary visitor, but a permanent member with her own place in their tightly woven bond. The realization was simultaneously daunting and deeply appealing. You've gone quiet, Seraphine, Ilara observed, touching her arm gently. Are you well? Has my enthusiasm overwhelmed you? Alaric often says I have all the restraint of a spring tornado. I am perfectly well, Seraphine assured her with a smile, merely absorbing the reality of this new chapter in my life. A week ago I stood alone in a corner at Lady Harwick's ball, invisible to all save those who wished to mock my solitude. Today I sit in Ravensdale House, engaged to be married, with a future far different from anything I might have imagined. Life's most significant turns often come unheralded, Alaric said quietly, his gaze meeting hers across the room. A single waltz can alter destinies. The simple statement, delivered in his characteristically measured tone, held layers of meaning that touched Seraphine deeply. Neither of them had entered Lady Harwick's ballroom expecting to find a spouse, yet that evening had set in motion a series of events that would join their lives permanently. Indeed it can, she agreed softly. Now we must plan, Ilara declared, breaking the moment of quiet understanding between them. The wedding may be small, but it must be perfect. Seraphine will need a trousseau. Oh, I shall accompany you to Madame Laurent's again tomorrow to order your wedding gown. And we must discuss the guest list, the flowers, the music. Ilara, Alaric interrupted, his tone gently restraining. Perhaps allow Seraphine to finish her tea before inundating her with wedding preparations. She has had precious little time to adjust to her new circumstances. Seraphine appreciated his consideration, though she found Ilara's enthusiasm more heartening than overwhelming. After years of solitude, being the focus of such genuine care and attention felt like stepping from shadow into sunlight, briefly dazzling, but ultimately warming. I welcome your assistance with the preparations, Ilara, she said, patting the girl's hand. Though perhaps we might begin with more modest considerations than an entire trousseau. The wedding gown would be an excellent start. This concession satisfied Ilara, who immediately launched into a detailed description of the latest bridal fashions, complete with passionate opinions on suitable fabrics and designs. As she chattered happily, Alaric caught Seraphine's eye over his sister's head, his expression conveying both apology for Ilara's exuberance and gratitude for Seraphine's patient indulgence. In that silent exchange, in the perfect understanding that passed between them without words, Seraphine glimpsed the true potential of their union. Theirs would not be a marriage of desperate passion or blind romantic attachment, but something potentially more enduring, a partnership founded on mutual respect, strengthened by shared purpose and warmed by growing affection. As afternoon faded toward evening, Seraphine found herself reluctant to depart from Ravensdale House. In just a few hours, the grand residence had begun to feel less intimidating and more welcoming. Not yet home, perhaps, but with clear potential to become so. "You must stay for dinner," Ilara insisted, when Seraphine eventually mentioned returning to her townhouse. "Now that you're to be family, there's no reason for such formality. Is there, Alaric?" The Duke hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against inclination. "While I would be delighted to have Seraphine join us," he said carefully, "we must consider appearances until the engagement is officially announced. Perhaps a compromise? I could escort Seraphine home in the carriage, ensuring her reputation remains unsullied, while allowing us additional time for conversation." The suggestion, so characteristic of his practical nature, made Seraphine smile. "A sensible solution," she agreed. "Though I confess I am somewhat amused by the concern for my reputation, given that we shall be married within 3 weeks. Society's judgments are rarely logical," he replied with the faintest hint of irony, "but they remain powerful nonetheless. I would not have your name subjected to further speculation even briefly." His protectiveness, while perhaps unnecessarily scrupulous given their imminent marriage, nonetheless touched Seraphine deeply. This man, soon to be her husband, guarded her dignity as fiercely as he had protected his sister's reputation years earlier. As twilight descended over London, casting long shadows across Grosvenor Square, Alaric handed Seraphine into his carriage for the short journey to Bloomsbury. Ilara had embraced her warmly at parting, extracting promises regarding tomorrow's wedding gown expedition before reluctantly releasing her future sister-in-law. Now seated beside the Duke in the privacy of his well-sprung carriage, Seraphine felt a curious mixture of contentment and anticipation. Their engagement was mere hours old, yet already it had begun to transform her existence in ways both profound and promising. "Are you comfortable?" Alaric inquired, his voice low in the intimate confines of the vehicle. "Perfectly so," she replied, conscious of his proximity in a way that had not troubled her during their drawing-room conversations. Here, with darkness gathering outside and only the subtle glow of the carriage lamps illuminating his features, she was acutely aware of him not merely as the Duke of Ravensdale, but as the man who would soon be her husband in every sense. "Ilara's enthusiasm did not overwhelm you?" "Not at all," Seraphine assured him, smiling at his concern. "Her joy is refreshingly genuine in a world where sincerity is often lacking. She will make a wonderful sister. And you," he said quietly, "will make a remarkable duchess." 5 years later, the great ballroom of Ravensdale House blazed with light, its chandeliers casting golden radiance upon the assembled cream of London society. The season's most coveted invitation had drawn peers and politicians, artists and diplomats, all eager to attend the Duchess of Ravensdale's annual spring ball, now firmly established as the social event that truly marked the beginning of the season. At the entrance to the ballroom, Seraphine stood beside her husband, greeting their distinguished guests with the perfect balance of warmth and dignity that had made her one of society's most admired hostesses. The sapphire blue silk of her gown complemented her eyes, and the magnificent Ravensdale diamonds at her throat, a gift from Alaric on the birth of their son 2 years earlier. "The Prime Minister and Lady Spencer," announced the butler, as the distinguished couple approached. "Your Grace," the Prime Minister greeted Alaric with evident respect before turning to Seraphine. "Duchess, your hospitality continues to outshine all others. One almost suspects you of deliberately setting a standard the rest of London cannot hope to match." Seraphine smiled, accepting the compliment with gracious ease. "You are too kind, Lord Spencer, though I confess the competition keeps one's creative faculties sharp. I understand Lady Harwick has engaged an Italian chef for her dinner next week. A gauntlet thrown, no doubt." They shared a laugh of perfect understanding, society's subtle warfare conducted through dinners and decorations rather than words or weapons. As the Spencers moved into the ballroom, Alaric bent slightly toward his wife. "You handle him masterfully," he murmured, admiration evident in his voice. "He arrived determined to secure my support for that railway bill, yet you've disarmed him completely, without a single mention of politics." "The direct approach seldom succeeds with men accustomed to power," Seraphine replied softly. "Far better to create an atmosphere where agreements feel like natural conclusions rather than negotiated settlements." Alaric's hand brushed hers briefly, a subtle gesture of affection that spoke volumes about their relationship. 5 years of marriage had deepened their initial respect into something far richer, a partnership of minds and hearts that confounded society's expectations of aristocratic unions. Lady Elara Kingswood and Captain James Kingswood, announced the butler, drawing their attention to the elegant young couple approaching the receiving line. "Elara," Seraphine exclaimed, embracing her sister-in-law warmly. "I did not expect you until tomorrow. What a delightful surprise." "James managed to secure leave a day earlier than anticipated," Elara explained, her face radiant with happiness as she glanced at her husband of 3 months. "We travelled directly from Portsmouth, arriving barely in time to dress for the ball." Captain Kingswood, a distinguished naval officer whose quiet intelligence perfectly complemented Elara's vivacity, bowed respectfully to the Duke and Duchess. "Your Graces, I hope our early arrival does not inconvenience your arrangements." "Family is never an inconvenience," Alaric assured him, clasping his brother-in-law's hand with genuine affection. "Your quarters are perpetually ready, as you well know." As Elara and her husband moved into the ballroom, Seraphine felt a gentle tug at her skirts. Looking down, she discovered her 2-year-old son, the Marquis of Thornwick, who had evidently escaped his nursemaid's supervision to investigate the excitement below stairs. "Alexander," she said, bending to gather the child into her arms, "you should be abed, my little Marquis." "Want dance," the boy declared solemnly, his blue-grey eyes, so like his father's, surveying the glittering ballroom with aristocratic assurance. Alaric regarded his heir with a mixture of exasperation and pride. "Already developing a taste for society, I see. His timing, however, leaves much to be desired." The Duke summoned a footman to locate the errant nursemaid, but before the servant could depart on his mission, Lady Ottilie Greythorne approached the receiving line. 5 years had added subtle lines to her once flawless countenance, though her beauty remained undeniable. "Your Graces," she greeted them, her gaze lingering on Alexander with poorly concealed envy. What a charming domestic tableau, though perhaps unexpected in such a formal setting. The barb was delicately delivered but unmistakable, a reminder that even duchesses should maintain proper distance between their maternal and social roles. 5 years earlier, such a comment might have wounded Seraphine deeply. Now secure in both her position and her happiness, she merely smiled. "Children have a remarkable instinct for moments of significance, Lady Greythorne. Alexander clearly wishes to witness the waltz that opens our ball, a tradition that holds particular meaning for the Duke and myself." Lady Ottilie's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. How sentimental. Though one might observe that sentimentality is the luxury of those whose positions are unassailable. "Indeed," Alaric agreed with deceptive mildness. "Much like kindness, I have always found that true security enables generosity of spirit, while uncertainty breeds less admirable qualities." Before Lady Ottilie could formulate a response to this pointed observation, the nursemaid appeared, apologizing profusely for Alexander's escape. The boy protested briefly as he was transferred from his mother's arms, but Seraphine whispered a promise that soothed his disappointment. "Tomorrow you shall dance with me in the morning room," she assured him, "a private ball for the Marquis of Thornwick." As Alexander departed with his nursemaid, Seraphine turned to find her husband watching her, with that particular expression she had come to cherish, a look of quiet wonder, as though even after 5 years of marriage, he sometimes could not quite believe she was truly his. "It is almost time for the opening waltz," he observed, offering his arm as the last of their guests were announced. "Shall we maintain tradition, Duchess?" "Always, Your Grace," she replied, placing her hand upon his sleeve. Together they moved to the center of the ballroom, the assembled guests parting before them with murmurs of appreciation. The Duke of Ravensdale and his Duchess had become London's model of aristocratic marriage, respected for their dignified public comportment, admired for their intelligent conversation, envied for their evident contentment. As they took their positions for the waltz, Seraphine caught sight of Lady Harwick, watching them with undisguised fascination. The woman who had once ignored her at the edges of her ballroom now scrutinized her every movement, seeking clues to the alchemy that had transformed a scorned widow into one of society's most influential hostesses. The orchestra struck the opening notes, and Alaric's hand settled at her waist with familiar assurance. "What amuses you?" he inquired, noting her subtle smile. "I was remembering another waltz," she replied, as they began to move in perfect synchrony. 5 years ago, when you crossed a crowded ballroom and whispered those life-changing words." His expression softened with shared recollection. "May I have this waltz?" he quoted softly, guiding her through a graceful turn. "The question that altered everything," she agreed, "though I did not realize then how completely my life would transform." "Do you ever regret accepting?" he asked, his voice pitched for her ears alone, despite the certainty she imagined he felt regarding her answer. "Not for a single moment," Seraphine assured him, her gaze meeting his with perfect honesty. "You offered partnership and respect, Alaric, yet gave me so much more. Love was not in our original arrangement, yet here it stands between us, undeniable and precious." Something flickered in his eyes, a vulnerability few would believe possible in the stern Duke of Ravensdale. "I did not promise love," he acknowledged quietly, "because I feared presumption. Yet it grew nonetheless, taking root in soil I thought barren after years of duty and restraint." The waltz carried them past glittering couples and admiring observers, yet in that moment they might have been alone in the vast ballroom. "Some crops require no cultivation," Seraphine replied, her voice warm with emotion. "They flourish naturally when the ground is properly prepared." His hand tightened slightly at her waist, a silent acknowledgement of her metaphor's truth. They had indeed prepared fertile ground through respect and honesty, allowing deeper feelings to develop organically rather than forcing sentimental declarations before their time. As the music swelled toward its conclusion, Seraphine glimpsed Ilara dancing with her captain, their mutual adoration evident in every glance. Nearby, young Alexander had escaped his nursemaid once more and stood watching his parents from behind a marble column, his expression one of solemn fascination. The final notes of the waltz sounded, and Alaric bowed formally before her as protocol demanded. Yet as he straightened, he spoke words meant only for her. "May I have every waltz, Seraphine, for all the nights that remain to us?" The echo of his proposal, refined now by years of deepening affection, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "As many as there are stars," she whispered, completing their private ritual. The ballroom erupted in appreciative applause as the Duke and Duchess concluded the opening dance. Other couples now took to the floor, the evening's festivities commencing in earnest. Yet for Seraphine, the true celebration was the quiet knowledge she carried in her heart, that from mockery had come dignity, from arrangement had come devotion, from a single waltz had come a lifetime of unexpected joy. Lady Ottilie passed nearby, her gaze still sharp with envy as she observed Seraphine's evident happiness. "You have certainly secured your position admirably, Your Grace," she remarked, her compliment barbed with insinuation. "One might almost forget your humble beginnings." Seraphine smiled with genuine serenity, beyond the reach of such petty barbs. "On the contrary, Lady Greythorn, I remember them with perfect clarity, for they are the foundation upon which all else stands. Without the mockery there would have been no waltz. Without the waltz, no marriage. Without the marriage—" She glanced toward Alaric, who stood conversing with the Prime Minister, yet remained aware of her, his gaze finding hers across the crowded room. "I would never have discovered that life's greatest treasures often arrive disguised as misfortunes." Without awaiting Lady Ottilie's response, Seraphine moved gracefully through her ballroom, acknowledging guests and ensuring their comfort with practiced ease. The Duchess of Ravensdale had no need to prove her worth or defend her happiness. Both were self-evident to all who observed her. Later that night, when the last guests had departed and Ravensdale House settled into peaceful silence, Seraphine stood at the window of their bedchamber, gazing at the star-scattered sky above London. Alaric joined her there, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "What thoughts occupy you, my Duchess?" he murmured against her hair. "I was counting stars," she replied softly, "and considering how many waltzes they might represent." His quiet laughter warmed her neck. "A lifetime's worth, I should think." "A lifetime?" Seraphine agreed, leaning back against his solid strength. "Who would have imagined that night at Lady Harwick's ball that a single whispered question would lead us here?" "I did," Alaric admitted, turning her gently to face him. "Not with certainty, perhaps, but with hope. The first real hope I had permitted myself in years." As his lips found hers in the starlit darkness of their chamber, Seraphine reflected that society's cruelest mockery had ultimately led to its greatest gift. A love that had begun with a whispered invitation to dance and now promised to waltz through all the seasons of their lives, as numerous and brilliant as the stars above London's awakening spring. In life's cruelest moments, when mockery and isolation threaten to define us, dignity remains our most powerful armor. Lady Seraphine's story reminds us that true nobility flows not from titles or wealth, but from the courage to stand tall amid scorn, to accept an outstretched hand when offered with respect, and to recognize that paths to happiness rarely follow expected patterns. The Duke's whispered invitation, "May I have this waltz?" was more than a question. It was an acknowledgement that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and included. His gesture reminds us that compassion, expressed through simple actions rather than grand declarations, often creates the most profound transformations in others' lives. Their journey from arrangement to affection teaches us that love's deepest roots grow not from passion's fleeting soil, but from the bedrock of mutual respect, shared purpose, and daily kindnesses. They built something enduring by valuing character above convention, substance above appearance, and growth above immediate gratification. Perhaps most powerfully, their story reveals how life's apparent misfortunes, Seraphine's widowhood and mockery, the Duke's scandal and exile, often become the very foundations upon which our greatest joys are built. Had either been spared their earlier suffering, they might never have developed the strength, wisdom, and compassion that ultimately united them. In a world obsessed with instant connections and dramatic declarations, They Mocked the Widow offers a quieter truth, that meaningful relationships develop like gardens rather than explosions, through patient tending, seasonal changes, and the mysterious alchemy that transforms practical partnerships into profound bonds that sustain us through all of life's changing seasons. Did this story of redemption and unexpected love touch your heart? If the Duke's whispered invitation to waltz stirred something within you, please subscribe to our channel for more Victorian love stories that explore the power of dignity, respect, and courage in the face of society's cruelest judgments. Comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when kindness arrived unexpectedly, transforming your darkest hour? Or perhaps you've been the one to extend a hand to someone standing alone, not realizing how profoundly your simple gesture might change their life. Each story we share explores the beautiful complexity of human connections, how we wound, heal, and ultimately save each other through actions both grand and subtle. Don't miss our next upload, where another tale of redemptive love awaits.